not my beat.
Mitch Tischler, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast from Monumental Sports, of course, alongside JP Finley. Mitchell, hello again.
How you doing, Craig? You guys can play me in with a Vici anytime. That gets me fired up.
Nice. Add the air horns to it next time, Anthony, and we got our own Mitch Tischler remix, which is really what this show's about, is making sure our guests feel nice, comfy, and at home. By the way, how terrible is your drive to Baltimore? Because my drive back in the office from Ashburn was absolutely terrible.
Oh, I mean, this is going to take me 3 hours. It's a disaster.
Yeah, instant traffic. Just add water, and that is the day we are having in the DMV. Of course, Mitchell be up there tonight. The Fever and Mystics. You can hear the Monumental Sports broadcast simulcast here on the Team 980. However, Mitchell, talking football now and what we saw today. Speaking of a sad Mitch Tischler, how sad were you that the O-line, D-line drills were as far away from us as the media as you could possibly imagine?
I took it as a personal affront that they wouldn't let me get up close and personal with the O-line and D-line with the big guys over there. But from afar, I could use my 2020 long-term vision and get a couple glimpses of what was happening over there. And it was good to see Josh Connerly out there running around. It was good to see Brandon Coleman working a little bit at guard over there and, seeing those guys do what they do.
I was going to say, so what did you see? I also tried to watch a little bit over there, but ultimately defaulted to the things that were mostly happening in front of me. Obviously, we only got 7-on-7. There's no 11-on-11. There's no pads. But what did you see, even in just terms of where everybody's working with Connerly, with Coleman, with that offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one thing that stands out, and it's a Dan Quinn staple, is those rookies don't necessarily get those first team reps. They don't necessarily get the reps. And let's be honest, we're at an OTA here. There's no pads. For O-line, it's mostly, hand placement work and foot placement and steps and all those different things. They don't get into a whole lot of lining up 5-on-5 and doing a whole lot. So you're really kind of trying to read who's lining up next to who in the two-man drills. And Brandon Coleman spent a lot of time over there playing guard, both on the left and the right side, but more so on the left side there. And you saw Trent Scott getting those first team left tackle, what seems to have been first team left tackle reps, with Wiley getting the quote unquote first team right tackle reps. Now, obviously Connerly got plenty of work in there as well. But one thing I love to see, and anyone who played freshman high school football went through it, but when it was Wiley's turn to go in the one-on-one drills, he was up against Josh Connerly, who was holding the pads for him. When they were doing the double team work with, guard and tackle, you saw Connerly having to hold the pads for what we, would assume are the starters or the guys who would be getting the first team reps work. So it was, there's not a ton that you can take away from O-line here when they're running around in shorts and a T-shirt. And, I don't like that I didn't see Laramie Tunsil there a lot. Obviously, it's voluntary. He can skip it all he wants. For these guys who are new to the team, I'd like to see them spend more time around the team, get to know everybody. All that being said, they have, tons of work coming up between, the mandatory camps and when we get to training camp, and obviously through the season to get all that stuff worked out. And because they're just in shorts and a T-shirt, it's not the end of the world that he wasn't there.
So I agree on the Tunsil part of it. Like you like to see everybody there. Like being there is better than not being there. How much does it actually move the needle in the fall? I don't think that much for a guy like Tunsil. Same thing, frankly, for Lattimore and for Terry McLaurin. That said, Mitchell, one of the things I have spent mental energy thinking about today and a little bit of time on the show today is thinking like, okay, well, why are they not there and what's it going to take to get them there? Do you foresee any kind of contract shenanigans with Marshawn Lattimore or Laramie Tunsil? Or are these just vets who are like, this is voluntary, I don't want to go?
It's kind of tough to speculate on that because for all we know, there was a wedding, there was, a graduation, a birthday, or, whatever may be happening in those guys' lives. And it is voluntary, so I don't want to really go too far down, that matrix. To me, when we get to the mandatory minicamp in 2 weeks, if those guys aren't there, then I think we have to kind of start asking real questions. Laramie Tunsil, if he wants a new contract or wants more, money, he's at least proven it on the football field that he deserves it. Certainly not in the burgundy and gold yet, but we've seen it over the years from him. You know, he's a star player. Marshon Lattimore has no leg to stand on, no pun intended, when it comes to, you know, trying to ask for more money or a different contract or guaranteed money. I mean, quite frankly, you know, you and I talked about it a little on the sideline, but heading into the draft, you know, there are needs across this team. This isn't a team that, you know, is purely picking best player available because, you know, they're kind of ready to go with what they got. That cornerback room to me is one of the most troublesome groups on this roster because there's an expectation that Marshon Lattimore is going to return to his at least Pro Bowl form, or there's a hope there. But if he doesn't, you know, that corner room before Trey Amos came in doesn't have a whole lot of names in there that would inspire confidence for you. And I think when I look at the corner group, you know, if you have a front four that gets after the quarterback really well, maybe you can get away with a little bit of a weaker secondary/corner contingency. But they clearly, you know, put an emphasis on wanting to stop the run, figure out how to be better against the run, which I think is very important. But because of that, the expectation has to be, at least from, you know, the secondary coaches and players, that they're going to have to cover longer. And the fact that that corner situation is as thin as it is troublesome. Now, all that being said, Trey Amos, I thought, looked very, very good today, and, you know, as good as you can look in an OTA. I think that he carries himself well. I think you saw some of the traits that this coaching staff wants to see out of him. We saw him with one interception and a second near interception on the sideline. You saw him running step for step with receivers on both deep routes, comebacks, outs, slants, crosses across the board. I mean, you know, I think you saw a lot of what you'd like to see out of a player running around in shorts and a T-shirt in, you know, 7-on-7 drills. But at the end of the day, I'm much more, I would say, maybe worried or frustrated by Lattimore not being there than I am either Terry or Tunsil, for that matter. So it'll be interesting to see when we get to mandatory stuff in 2 weeks where these guys draw the line, if they're even trying to draw a line in the sand, or if we're just reacting to what we're seeing in front of us today.
Mitch Tischler, co-host Beltway Football Podcast, with us. Do you feel like Quinn should have just said something then? Or, sometimes I feel like it's smart for coaches, execs, whoever, to get out ahead of stuff and fill the void that with the truth. That way it's not, everyone's not speculating. Sometimes it's like, whatever, do whatever you want. I don't really care. Like, did Quinn, I don't say do like that feels way too talk radio-y, talk TV, like nonsense to me. But like, do you think that there is a responsibility to like fill the void here, or do we just wait and see what happens and it is what it is?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think Dan Quinn and honestly this coaching staff have enough equity built in where I don't think we could take them to town for something along this. And at the end of the day, it very well could be much ado about nothing. I mean, you know, once we get to the mandatory stuff, you can kind of start digging into it a little bit more. Could Dan Quinn have squashed it and made it a absolute non-story by saying, you know, whatever the reason was for folks not being there? Sure. But at the same time, the more Dan Quinn talks about it, the more breath he breathes into the story, the more that folks can, pick apart his wording, how he said it, and all those different things and create, make this a bigger deal than it is. Certainly because it happened in front of us today on our first, OTA day, really being out there and seeing the group, I think, it's going to create a little bit of a storyline amongst, media and fans and folks around the league. But at the end of the day, I think we have to, look at this in a bigger picture situation where, this is voluntary. Players do have the option to miss these things. Do we want them there? Sure. But at the end of the day, if the coaches aren't bothered by it, if the coach isn't outwardly bothered by it, then until we start seeing it be, impacting important parts of this offseason, I don't know that we should read too much into it.
I think that's probably right. And I think it also depends on what the truth is. If Tunsil or Lattimore is asking, like if there's a contract situation and I'm Dan Quinn, I don't want to talk about that. So I'm just going, it's voluntary. They don't have to be here. Next question. And you okay. Hey, well, he didn't say whether it was or it wasn't. If they have something that's not contractual and you just know, oh, he's working on his own, it's just this is what he does this time of year. If it's Laramie Tunsil, like I don't mind answering that. I think you have to be flexible with these things, but alas, we wait till next week and maybe we ask Dan specifically why they're not there if they're not there next week. Again, Mitch Tischler is with us, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast. Amos's big day was definitely the big thing that I walked away with, Mitchell. Was outside of Amos, what was the big story for you today, or the big takeaway that as you're walking to your car through the rain today, that you're like, huh, that was interesting. That's worth chewing on a little bit.
I thought Mikey Sanders still looked fantastic, and it's weird to say that in an OTA, but working mostly out of the slot today, didn't do a whole lot on the outside. He was physical. He was quick. He had a number of PBUs. There was a really nice play with Deebo Samuel running kind of a little square in out of the slot. And Deebo used a little bit of his size. I mean, again, not in pads. So, they're not going, they're not trying to kill each other. But Deebo's a load of a receiver and a big square body. And Mikey did a great job of absorbing the contact and then getting out in front of him and almost having to come back to the ball to break up that little in pattern. And I just, we saw a lot of really good stuff out of Sanders still last year. And I had no doubt that he was going to continue to grow and build and get better as his NFL career continued. But to me, to make a statement like that, in your first OTA, and as those offensive and defensive players like to bark at each other a little bit. And Mikey's not the biggest trash talker in the world, but his play certainly allows some of those other guys to get loud, and it creates great competition, and it's a lot of fun. And quite frankly, it makes everybody better from quarterback to receiver to the defensive side of the ball. So that was great to see.
If you had 10 questions to ask Jayden Daniels, how many of them would you have spent on the size of his arms?
Listen, the Commanders' social media crew did him quite a favor with the picture they put out of him looking huge. And granted, if you were to sit there and flex on him, I bet those biceps pop a little bit. Seeing him in person, he definitely looks a little stronger, a little bit bigger. Certainly below the belt, he looks put together, a little more thick, as the kids like to say. But I don't know that he's this. I don't know that it's this totally transformed body. But I will tell you, coming off of 1 year ago talking about Emmanuel Forbes gaining 17 pounds in the offseason and all of that talk, if you were to tell me that Jayden Daniels gained 17 pounds, I wouldn't question you that much. And so I thought it's good to see that he's clearly putting in the work and trying to grow that body and become a little bit more durable. But Cliff Kingsbury, I think, said it best in that he's still kind of scrawny, and that's just kind of the body shape that he has. Yes,
and that didn't stop 85 questions in Jayden's press conference today from being about. Sorry to go back to it, but may I ask another question about if you got jacked or not? Very, very funny. I thought Jayden handled it well, including when he ran away at the end.
Right, he's just so cool, calm, and collected. It's part of when we talk about this NFL schedule, big picture with all the primetime games and all that, like. Those are games that, not taking any shots at Kirk Cousins here, but, those are games that not every player always gets up for or is able to handle kind of not just the pressure, but the change in schedule of the week, the later game, the sleep schedule, all those different things that happen. And what we've seen out of Jayden from the time he was drafted until now just further emphasizes the fact that he's pretty unflappable and nothing really gets to him. And, we've seen first-round top 5 draft picks spend off seasons, doing the publicity tours and going on different game shows and missing OTAs and stuff like that because they had photo shoots or commercial spots or whatever it may be. And even though Jayden is the talk of the town, the toast of the town in the NFL, and you're seeing him, being promoted left, right, and center. He has the Nike commercial. He has, all these things happening for him. Clearly, with the work that he put in the weight room, he's putting in the work. And then the fact that, he's here leading the guys at a, voluntary OTA, It's just, everything about him speaks professional, speaks, NFL, long-term NFL successful storyline. And I think that, as he continues to mature and continue on in his career, he's going to be a discussion point. He's going to be an example of how to carry yourself, how to handle fame, publicity, stardom, all those different things. And I am just beyond thankful that we're talking about him in the burgundy and gold.
Mitch Tischler, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Mitch, you have covered this team for a long time. You've seen a lot of dudes roll through here. Have you ever seen a big dude who makes other big dudes look small, quite like Javon Kinlaw? Seeing him in person today broke my brain a little bit. Like, I knew he was huge. I knew he was powerful. I knew all that. I knew he moved really well. Seeing it in person was different. Were you also struck by that?
It was both him and Dietrich Wise are enormous human beings. And I had a couple minutes to talk to Dietrich, and he has a heck of a handshake over there. The only other player that really reminds me of like a big guy who makes other big guys look not quite as big was Ty Nseki when he was here
as
the backup.
goal.
But big picture wise, I talked about a little bit with the defensive line. I think that this front office and this coaching staff put a premium on finding big body guys who are going to be able to slow down the run. Because quite frankly, if I find myself in an NFL football game and it's my quarterback against yours, I don't know how many other quarterbacks in the NFL I'm taking over Jaden Daniels. And so as a defense, if you're able to, shut down that run a little bit and you're able to stop the run with mostly the front four, and front maybe six if you include, a couple interior linebackers, that creates a lot of opportunity for a defense to be successful. And while I don't necessarily think that there's a guy that I can pinpoint that's going to have maybe double-digit sacks or, have a big-time breakout season getting after the quarterback, at first glance at an OTA, in shorts and a T-shirt, I think you're looking at a D-line that is going to be much more stout against the run. And I think that's something that this coaching staff wanted to make happen, and they went out and got players to do that.
Next week, back again. Joe Witt Jr. will speak, I believe, next week. And then I think there's one more voluntary. And then, actually, no, it's next week's voluntary, and then the mandatory is coming up mid-June. So when you go back next week, Mitchell, what's the thing that you want to double-click on after getting your first click in this week? What's the thing you're like, I want to watch that thing that I saw a lot more of to try to glean more intel?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of two things. I'll start defensively because we're going to talk to Joe Witt Jr. To me, and maybe I'm too high on Trey Amos. I don't know if that's possible or that's the case, but we've seen these corners in Joe Witt / Dan Quinn defenses, pop almost out of nowhere or a little unexpectedly with interception numbers, with kind of dominance on the outside. And when I look at Trey, when they drafted him to now having seen him play pretty well, obviously in a 7-on-7 scenario, I'm wondering, what they think his ceiling is. Kind of, are they looking at him? Do they think that this rookie season could be a Trayvon Diggs-esque, rookie season where kind of, a little unexpectedly he goes out and competes for the lead in the NFL in interceptions? And how much of a kind of shutdown corner can he be? Because today, more than, you can look at the numbers. Some guys can run real fast, and then when you see them on the field, that speed doesn't always necessarily translate. With Amos, I saw the speed that I wanted to see. I saw the physicality, at least as much as you can show in an OTA there. And I think Joe Witt, I got to believe that Joe Witt and Dan Quinn are pretty excited about it. And then offensive side of the ball, you look at this receiving room and, outside of Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, we can probably nail down a couple other guys that are going to be there. I kind of forgot about Noah Brown. He's been kind of, he's been overlooked since, obviously he didn't play the back end of last year, but he's looked, he played really well last year. I think when he got hurt, he led the NFL in pass interference yards against him. He's a guy who did a really good job of going downfield and using his body to either make big catches or get penalties. I look at a Luke McCaffrey who, I think one thing that that Cliff Kingsbury talked about was him playing a little bit freer because he can, he knows the offense a little bit better. This wide receiver room is going to be a real battle when we get to training camp. Michael Gallup, KJ Osborne, Ja'Cory Brooks. I mean, there are a bunch of dudes there who, can easily, make rosters. And then on top of it, you have Jalen Lane, who to me, I think is an interesting player in that I feel like he's almost a little bit of an insurance policy for Deebo Samuel if Deebo ends up walking next year, because what we saw last year from Jalen at Virginia Tech, I think you can kind of compare to a lot of things that Deebo has done in the passing game in his NFL career. And, I want to see Jalen Lane's speed. I want to click in a little further and see how crisp those routes are and how he works against either press coverage, against back off man, against zone. I want to see the way that he's able to find openings to get the ball. And then the biggest thing with him is he has the speed on paper. We haven't seen him necessarily be a huge deep threat from college. So I want to see how he tracks the ball on the deep balls. I want to see how he uses his body, to go up and get those 50-50 balls 20 yards down the field, 30 yards down the field, because we know that Jaden Daniels has the ability to make those great throws, but he also has the fearlessness to throw those 50-50 balls and allow his guys to get up and go get it. So Jalen Lane is really a guy that I want to spend a little more time watching and kind of get a feel for where I think he can fit into this offense, because he can do a lot of different things. And obviously, in the special teams, punt return is going to be a big part of it, but I want to see more speed downfield. I want to see them stretching the field, not just sideline to sideline, but end zone to end zone. And Jalen Lane, at least on paper with his speed, seems to be the type of guy that can do that.
For sure. There's a couple of routes today where he just ate up ground. You're like, oh, there it is. There's the speed. But doing it against full defenses and with dudes in the way is obviously a very different thing. Mitch Tischler, Beltway Football Podcast. Check it out wherever you get your pods. He and JP Finley. Mitchell, good to see you today, my friend. And I presume I'll see you next week as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Always good to have you. And by the way, safe travels on however much is left in your torturous trip to Baltimore.
Thank you.
It's Mitch Tischler, everybody, on his way to Baltimore here on the Team 980.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.